Before we begin, thank you very much to TJOmega is the new hotshot in the Netflix version of the Unicron trilogy for joining the Patreon campaign. I don't know if that would be the best or worst casting they could do. And for everyone who keeps telling me, oh, well, you actually don't have a bad voice, you should do voice acting. Like, I've seen me act. This is definitely an alternate universe you have dived in from. But thank you very much for the support. Thank you for the chip in there on the Patreon campaign. Remember, it takes $1 to get a shout out, and it will be literally anything you want. So if you haven't signed up before, if you want to make me say something goofy before a video, that is how you do it. And I thank everyone who makes me do it. Alright, so speaking of my Patreon, this is kind of in response to a request that I got via my top level patrons. I normally keep it kind of vague. I keep it anonymous who makes what request, just because. But Trinantula sent me a request that was similar to what I did for the unreleased G2 characters, and wanted me to create another story similar to that, using Diaclone as a suggestion, because we've had a lot of Diaclone characters popping into Transformers through Generation Selects, capsule lines, etc. They're all over the place. And the request was to come up with some kind of story for them. Here's the trick, though. So with the Generation 2 story I did, that was creating characters for repaints that had no characterization or personality of any kind. They had no fiction behind them. As it turns out, most of the Diaclone released Transformers, all those characters who came in from Diaclone after Transformers was established, all of those have, almost all of them, have modern Transformer counterparts. They have been done in a Transformers brand in one way, shape, or form, and many of them actually do have places in the story and actually have reason for being around. So here's what I'm doing today. We are tackling Diaclone, and we are going to go through all of those characters that have joined Transformers after the franchise was established. Latecomers to Generation 1, if you will. This is mostly going to be an educational video, not a story creative video, so Trinantula, if that does not meet your request, then please, by all means, even if you're not on the Patreon anymore, feel free to DM me a secondary request if this doesn't satisfy. I know you want something more on the creative end, so we'll see. If this doesn't suffice, you let me know. But for the most part, we're going to go over a history of Diaclone characters who have jumped into Transformers, and for the most part, I will be abbreviating info from TF Wiki for this, for full disclosure. Go to these individual pages if you want the full rundown, because there's also alternate versions of a lot of these characters, and it gets a little bit absurd. We're going to start with some of the more well-known ones and some of the more well-used, with that being Exhaust, who actually did manage an appearance in a cartoon, which is something exceptionally rare for any of these particular characters. So, Exhaust belongs with Marlboro Dynamic. Marlboro Dynamic. Oh, I see what you did there. So, basically, he's an information broker. Steals secrets from everyone else in the galaxy, sell them off. And the fun part about him is that he's been given enough detail and info that he has abilities right down to how the Generation 1 cast had special abilities. In his case, he can convert his body into living smoke. Do you see what they're doing here? So he is into industrial espionage. He's, secret gatherer. He's a spy, etc. And yeah, in some fictions, he actually does have a smoking habit from the stress of his job. But for the most part, in modern depictions, he's actually just one of the mercenary types. So, kind of on an outlier for Transformers in general, which kind of feels appropriate for any Diaclone character, not going to lie. But yeah, Exhaust is one that's actually popped up a lot more than some of the others. The other one being Crosscut. Crosscut was actually used in IDW pretty well as a senator character. He's an ambassador. Someone who can travel and conduct peaceful negotiations through other areas in space. He's got something like 6,500 languages under his belt, both from Earth and otherwise. And everything he carries, while he's a well-armed character, all of it is purely in defense. It's meant to stun, incapacitate, knock out, etc. The part about it is, in order to work in some of his accessories from his masterpiece figure, there's an additional bit of fiction to him that says that he has a drone that will basically escape with a backup of his data and memories, just in case he falls in battle, because that data is too important to lose. Kind of interesting, and a little bit. So, like I said, there's alternate versions. A lot of that comes from the Masterpiece Toys bio for him, but as we said, in IDW, he was a senator who became a playwright. So he has a lot of differences. There's a lot of differences to some of these. Next up, we're going to look at the other repaint for Skids, or at least another one of the repaints for Skids, and this is Burnout. The fun of Burnout is incorporating these older Diaclone toys back into Transformers means they can fill gaps, and one of the things they did was add a few females to the roster. Burnout actually is female. So, again, there's a few variations. The major depiction, again, comes from storylines for Masterpiece, where Burnout is actually a Diaclone-style robot. Well, not entirely. It's a Diaclone robot with an artificial intelligence. So not a true living Transformer, but a close amalgamation. And what she lacks is given to her by a pilot partner. In this case, a woman named Dia Cinders. There is a storyline where the two accidentally get merged and end up in a universe that allows her to be converted into a proper living robot, but that does stick Dia inside the machine. So it's a weird, there's a weird story. Of course, it's Japanese fiction. There's a weird story behind it. Other depictions, like in Timelines and Legacy, kind of omit that. At least the American versions. In the Japanese version of the Velocitron storyline, they still use Dia Cinders as part of the character. So it's a little bit weird. Like I said, lots of alternate ways of looking at some of these, but there is a character and a personality there. She is, by the way, known for determination, stoicism, and stubbornness, which does lead to a lot of infighting with her partner, but that creates a fun dynamic too. One more for the road. One more that we can go on for Skids repaints, and that's Reboost. And Reboost, to me, I'll keep saying it because it's genius. Always felt like what happens if Orion Pax never became Optimus and still managed to end up on Earth. So, he is known for an outgoing attitude and includes many hobbies, including giving rides to humans. That seems a little bit unsafe for the humans, but okay. Photography, weaving. It's mostly just kind of like he's a hobby guy. He doesn't seem to be doesn't seem to be interested in the whole war aspect. So he does have a little bit more of a interesting little bit to him. He also is involved in the Marlborough story, so you could also see him as kind of a counterpart to Exhaust. So there's another little bit for you. He's also capable of putting his holomatter avatar into his own personal autonomous drone, which makes him a little bit more capable than some of the others. So yeah, it's not. You see, Reboost. I'm just reading straight off the wiki. I'm trying to abbreviate, so I'm not just plagiarizing, but I'll read this one direct off. Reboost can power up the life force of any organism, organic or metallic, granting them increased power and even regenerative properties. So yeah, he's got some interesting tricks to him. I still think Earth Mode Orion Pax is the better idea. Let's move on to someone else that Masterpiece made come to life, and that's going to be Loud Pedal. Loud Pedal is a little weird, and ironically, again, someone else who is intertwined with Exhaust. I kind of like this idea that all these characters are kind of intermixed. All the Diaclone characters all kind of have their own little connective storyline going on, which is kind of fun. So looking at looking at this one, so this is a musician amongst Decepticons. It's due to something called intercranial autocomposition. His brain is constantly generating musical tones and melodies, which doesn't really translate well to combat, so he's looked upon very lowly by other Decepticons. But as a musician, he's an absolute genius. So that's how Exhaust kind of gets in good with him, by basically pretending to be his fan. It's a cool design. It's a cool design. I like it. I like it just as a premise. It's fun to come up with different things for Decepticons to do rather than just be war machines. I kind of like when they have flavor like this, so they're not just, like conquerors. There's actually facets to their society as well, even if they are buried. How about another Trax repaint, and that's going to be Road Rage. Road Rage is another one that's actually been used a little bit more commonly. IDW put her to use, and again, she's another fembot created from a past Diaclone figure. Now, as a robot, she's generally well-mannered. She's good with different cultures, so she makes for a good diplomat. She's generally very upbeat, cheerful, fun to be around. And then she transforms. And then you figure out why her name exists. So apparently there is a unrepairable short circuit in her when she transforms that turns her into just a massive speed demon with contempt for everyone else on the road that's not her. That's quirks like that are always fun, right? Like when there's like a little personality quirk that has to do with the vehicle mode rather than the robot, because that's kind of rare. It's kind of rare. It actually gives a little bit of twist to the vehicle. Beyond that, she kind of stands as kind of like a secondary Autobot in a lot of the stories she's in, so there's not a whole lot to go into her. She needs to be paired up. She needs to be paired up with Sideburn more often. I feel like that'd be his red car fantasy lived out. Speaking of red cars, we can move on to another mold. We'll go into Sunstreaker's repaints, and we'll talk about Spinout briefly. Again, this is another one who used to be a Diaclone robot. However, unlike Burnout, there isn't a partner involved this time. This was and it wasn't an artificial intelligence robot either. That's another thing to keep in mind. This was straight up just how a Diaclone character worked. Spinout was completely human-driven. He happened to fall into the home dimension of Transformers, where he was rebuilt and given proper robotic life. What's fun is that he remembers his previous life as a unliving robot, for what little sense I just made there. It does leave him with a fierce loyalty to mankind, but also leaves him with lingering worries that without a pilot, he's not going to be as effective as a warrior as he used to be. But, he's quick to battle, eager to help and save humanity, so he makes for a pretty good Autobot. So, insecurities. Insecurities, again, something else fun to play with in stories, and you don't really see it a lot in Transformers. I'm also realizing this is taking a while longer than I expected, so let's see if we can speed it up a little bit. We'll go into Cordon. Cordon is another of Diaclone's fascination with turning their sports cars into police cars. The trick to his character is that he suffers from memory loss. A glitch in his system causes him to regularly lose his memory. But he's also from an ancient point in Cybertronian history, which means even though his memories are being stripped, it is giving him these skill sets that he remembers from multitudes of different personalities and lives that he has lived through, that he can put to use. He's got kind of a weird Doctor Who thing going on, where every now and then his brain just regenerates into a new personality with a new memory, but he still retains the skill sets from his previous forms, which gives him a lot of special, unique quantities. So maybe a little bit unreliant, and he won't remember your birthday, but you know what? He is a jack of all trades, which is nice to see. We can move on to another police bot, and this one is Clampdown. Clampdown being our first in the Sideswipe era of repainting. This one pretty simple. He is a tough, dedicated cop who works alongside his human partners very well, but he does have a very straightforward black and white view of things. Far more than characters like Prowl. So he's way too by the books. Way too by the books. So while he is acting as an Earth police mech, or Earth police robot, essentially, he is also working alongside his brother, who, of course, is another repaint, and this is Deep Cover. So Deep Cover is the black Sideswipe repaint, and again, part of what is called the Interplanetary Personnel Exchange Program, which means there's some humans stuck on Cybertron trying to run beat cop work, which I can't imagine goes well for them, but okay. So you have two sides of the story here. So you have a Clampdown that looks into all of the actual police work, and actually the law enforcement one, and then you have Deep Cover, who is the one that's undercover all the time and getting more intricate into things. And yeah, the result of undercover work, this is straight out of any cop drama, has left him with some inner demons to struggle with, but beyond that, he's still a pretty vigilant defender, so good for him. Good for him. How about his repaint, the Yellow Tiger Track? So back in Diaclone day, they had these two flip color schemes, which I guess is what inspired them to become brothers in G1. So here we have Tiger Track, Sideswipe in Sunstreaker colors. Again, his personality calls for a lot of vigilance. Admittedly, he is a little bit thinner in story. He is a sentry who is very good at spotting things in very low visibility conditions because he's very strong sensor array. And he does have enough power and weapons to back up anything he does find with these sensors. Beyond that, though, honestly, he is a little bit thin in story. He's used in some of the Legends comic books. He's a little bit into trans tech, but honestly, yeah, if I'm going to write a story for any of these, this is definitely one that could be fleshed out a little bit more. We have one easy entry, which is to go through the Insecticons, which is starting with Zap Trap, and then we move on to Salvo, and finally, Shot Hole, who I end on because the name makes me laugh. These three, simple enough. This is what happens when you give a little bit more personality to the Insecticon clones. They're still mostly seen as clones in most fictions, and they will fall into parts of all their component pieces if Shrapnel loses control over them. But they are given unique personality and design, and with that comes unique name. But for the most part, they are pretty simplistic drone-type characters. They are actually used a little bit in the Transtech comic book stories, again as drones, but they're also identified closer to Warooters there, which is a throwback to what they were in Diaclone. So you got a pretty basic entry there, but it does give a little bit of characterization to the drones that the Insecticons like to employ. Now we move on to this one. Now, what we know as Powered Convoy actually inspired two different characters. So this one is Magna Convoy. So do you remember that weird pack-in Legends story where they had different color spectrum teams? Yeah, which is where we get Splendid Yellow Convoy, the female Optimus Prime. So this is the leader of the blue team, for lack of a better term. So originally, this was a non-sentient drone originally, but when the leader of the Blue Order died, which was Big Blue Convoy, by the way, he did that power from that character was infused in Magna Convoy to bring him to life as a full-fledged transformer. So he has the intention of the past leaders. but definitely not the experience. It's an interesting, almost kind of like Victory Leo situation, where the past leader reincarnates into the new one. He is tasked with finding and bringing in Straxus, as well as recovering the Matrix Sword, one of the more powerful relics in that fiction. So, we know him, however, as part of Delta Magnus, which is the other character inspired by the same Diaclone convoy. This is the leader of the Primal Vanguard. And the Primal Vanguard is a pretty solid team, made up of a few brand new characters from IDW, but it also included like the likes of Hound, Cup, Minimus Ambus, who is Ultra Magnus in that universe and part of the House of Magnus that these two both belong to. The other part is the Primal Vanguard also includes all of the Dinobots. So to give you an idea of just how powerful a leader Delta Magnus is, you have to realize that Grimlock is willing to follow him. That should tell you everything you need. Beyond that, he does have a tendency to overuse the word glorious. But beyond that, he just seems to be very, very, very solid leader. And, when you don't have an Optimus Prime, you get a Delta Magnus. There's a few other thin ones we have to follow. We haven't hit Hoist's repaints just yet, so we can briefly talk about Lift Ticket. So, by the way, the name Lift Ticket comes from a G.I. Joe character, and it still sounds like a terrible name, even in that context. The name was originally given to it by the Collector Club, because they were also doing the G.I. Joe convention at the time, so they had access to those trademarks as well. This is another Diaclone-driven character who specializes in salvage and mechanical repair, so not too unlike Hoist, with the difference of that he doesn't really have the creative instinct that he does. But he does work well with Klein, his Diaclone partner. So you have another human-robot pairing there. And again, an artificial intelligence, not, on the Autobot side, maybe not a proper living transformer, though. Again, in other fictions, this kind of changes a little bit, because there have been a couple different versions of Lift Ticket. And that brings us into the one we're anticipating this year. Masterpiece is actually going to bring us the yellow repaint of Hoist from Diaclone under the name Rigorous. And this is a Decepticon release, which is another interesting thing. Most of these tend to be Autobots, if you hadn't noticed. So the fun part about Rigorous is he's a combat surgeon. And once again, this kind of brings in the idea of filling gaps in this whole situation. Because, of course, Decepticons didn't have a medic in G1. So that is what they are going for here. They've invented a new Decepticon in Ronald McDonald colors, but it still exists in order to be what the Decepticons never had. Someone to repair them. Now, there are a few that have gotten toys, but have not gotten proper fiction or proper stories, and maybe someday we can devote a video to coming up with something for them. That would be DK3 Breaker, the blue version of Trailbreaker, as well as DK2 Guard, the Black Ironhide, which I thought would have been a great opportunity to bring back the Armorhide name, and, ironically enough, Silverstreak, who we now know as the blue Diaclone Blue Streak, thanks to the Buzzworthy Bumblebee line canonizing that. But that'd be one of the newest ones in this entry, so obviously has not had a chance to have any kind of story yet. There are others to account for. If you're wondering, is there anyone left? Because this is a ton of different characters that have escaped Diaclone to become more than meets the eye. Is there anyone left? Yes, but we're getting very, very thin. We still do not have the blue version of Hoist, which, would just be Lift Ticket with one or two color shades different. So not the most interesting of repaints, but it is possible. We are also missing, strangely enough, the red version of Mirage, which this is a knockoff you can currently get, but it looks the same. And that one, I'm actually kind of surprised. I guess it's just because we always have better or more interesting things to repaint Mirage into, albeit translucent versions, or Crasher, or, you know, Watermelon G2. But there you go. That is pretty much the long and short of all of the Diaclone releases that have become Transformers, after the Transformer brand was established. We've only got a couple of stragglers and a few that need an actual proper story, but for the most part, Hasbro and Takara both have done a decent job of giving them some place in the universe to belong, and they are in some ways telling their own interconnected story between the ones who are from the actual Diaclone universe and the ones who are wrapped up in all of Exhaust's messes. So, it's not so much of a non-existent story that I need to write something out for, it's just loose, small stories that very few people know. So hopefully this was an educational video for some of you out there. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you next time.